The faint scent of freshly brewed coffee lingers in the air as I hold the mug steady, staring at the text from my daughter. Sorry, Mom. I hope your surgery goes well. Hope you can make it to my party. Still, my fingers don't tremble as I set the mug down, the ceramic cool against the counter. The clock ticks louder now, echoing in the silence of the kitchen. As the minutes stretch, a decision forms within me. I've spent my life in the background. That ends today. I'll make her day my own. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The soft, honeyed glow of the morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds as Diana Hayes sipped her coffee, letting the quiet stillness of the house settle around her. Paul was already in the living room, murmuring to the dog, something about the weather and an upcoming game. She took a moment to absorb the silence, savoring it before the day's usual clamor began. It was just another Tuesday, except it wasn't. She knew what was coming. It had been on the calendar for months. The surgery. A simple procedure, they said. But still, there was that gnawing feeling that perhaps she should be more prepared. Or at least, more worried. But Diana wasn't the type to dwell on what she couldn't control. She would face it as she always had. Quietly. With dignity. Hey, Emily called last night. Paul's voice interrupted her thoughts as he shuffled into the kitchen, flipping through the morning paper. Diana's fingers tightened around the mug, but she didn't let her face betray any emotion. Oh? Was she checking in on me? Paul paused, folding the paper in half before setting it down on the counter. No, she was talking about her party. His voice was absent, the usual detachment that came when it was something Emily wanted. She's got the date set. Everything's coming together. Should be big. Diana nodded, trying not to flinch. She hadn't forgotten, of course, but hearing it out loud had a different weight to it. She cleared her throat, then casually added, Funny, I thought that was the same day as my surgery. Paul blinked. Oh, yeah, she mentioned that. I guess it slipped her mind. Diana smiled faintly, more out of habit than humor. She lifted the cup to her lips again, letting the warmth seep through her. She mentioned it? Paul's gaze wandered back to the paper. Yeah, but she's been busy. You know how she is. Anyway, it's all set for the party. You're okay with that, right? Diana looked at him, really looked at him. He was still trying to fold the paper neatly as if the conversation could be tucked away the same way. But it couldn't. I'm fine, she said, the words sliding out easily, almost too easily. It's her day after all. Paul didn't look up. Right, right. You don't mind then? Diana's fingers trembled slightly as she set the coffee mug back on the counter. Not at all. She took a slow breath, watching the sun shift slightly through the window, as though the world itself was oblivious to the crack that had formed in the quiet of her thoughts. Paul, sensing the shift, quickly added, I'm sure it'll all work out. You'll be at the hospital, and the party will be, well, the party. She nodded again, though her heart felt heavier than before. She didn't need Paul to understand, and perhaps she didn't need Emily to either. But still, there was that deep, unspoken ache that had settled into her chest. Diana? Paul's voice softened, pulling her out of her thoughts. We'll be okay. You'll be fine. It's just a little surgery. She offered a small, tight smile, her mind already far away from the kitchen, and the man who had for years remained a quiet spectator in their family's dynamics. A moment later, Diana's phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Emily. She unlocked the screen, reading the words with a cool detachment. Hey, Mom. Just wanted to confirm that your surgery is the same day as the party, right? Hope that's all good with you. Love you. Diana stared at the screen for a beat too long. She could almost hear Emily's voice in her head, as if the message itself was some sort of offhanded reassurance. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the clash of events, just a simple, polished text that made her feel invisible. Love you. The words felt like a faint echo, reverberating in her mind but never quite reaching her. Just like that, Diana muttered to herself. Paul glanced over, raising an eyebrow. Everything okay? She put the phone down, her fingers grazing the screen once more before she set it face down. Yes, everything's fine. She said it with a finality that made even her believe it. For a moment the room was quiet again, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Diana's gaze drifted to the family photo on the counter, the one from last year's summer vacation. They all looked so happy, so put together. The picture of a perfect family. She swallowed against the lump in her throat, that familiar pang of being overlooked creeping up on her. She wasn't angry, not yet. But there was something stirring inside her, a quiet resolve she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. She'd spent a lifetime making sure everyone else came first, her daughter, her husband, the world at large. But not anymore. Not anymore. The words hung in the air, unspoken but fiercely clear. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. And with that thought, Diana Hayes slowly stood up, her body moving with a newfound strength. Whatever came next, she would face it. Quietly, perhaps, but with a resolve that no one, not even Emily, could ignore. The clock ticked on. The day was just beginning, and soon it would be hers. The light in the living room was softer now, as if the day itself had grown tired. Diana sat on the couch, the phone resting between her fingers, her thumb hesitating over the screen. The familiar weight of the message from Emily still lingered, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being dismissed. She stared out the window for a long moment, the quiet suburban street beyond still and unremarkable. It was the kind of neighborhood where everything happened according to schedule. Family barbecues on weekends, kids running up and down sidewalks, lawns perfectly manicured, and lives quietly performed in perfect order. Her life, too, had once followed that same pattern. But not today. Today, there was something different. Diana's phone buzzed again, snapping her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Megan. How's the surgery prep going? Need anything? Diana exhaled slowly, grateful for the calm in Megan's tone. She tapped a quick reply. I'm okay, but we need to talk. Can you come over? It wasn't long before the doorbell rang. Diana rose to greet her friend, the click of the lock breaking the silence of the house. Megan stood at the door, a tall woman with sharp features and the unmistakable air of someone who had never let life get in her way. You're looking good, Megan said, stepping inside, her eyes immediately scanning the room as if there was something off about the place. Diana smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Come sit. She gestured to the couch, her heart already pounding with the conversation ahead. We need to talk about Emily. Megan raised an eyebrow. I take it, she hasn't exactly been the most considerate? Diana's lips tightened as she nodded, the pain of it still raw, even after all these years. She's got her party scheduled for the same day as my surgery, and she hasn't even bothered to acknowledge it. Megan's face hardened, her arms crossing over her chest. That's not okay, Diana. I know, Diana whispered. But what do I do? I don't want to make a scene, and I don't want to disrupt everything for her. You know how she is. This is the most important day of her year. She paused, a bitter chuckle escaping. Apparently, my surgery isn't even on her radar. Megan's eyes softened with sympathy. It's time you start making yourself a priority. You've spent a lifetime catering to her. You don't have to just lie there and let her run the show. Diana leaned back, her mind racing. She didn't want to spend the day in a hospital room, waiting to recover from a procedure while the world, especially Emily, went on without her. She didn't want to be sidelined like that, to be nothing but an afterthought. She needed something more. Megan, Diana said, her voice steady now. I'm not going to just lay in that sterile bed. I'm going to take control of this day. I've given up enough. I want to reclaim it. Megan blinked, clearly surprised by the fire in Diana's voice. Reclaim it? How? Diana stood, her heart racing with the power of the decision. I'm going to recover. At her party. Megan's eyes widened. What do you mean? I'm going to contact Lena Clark, Diana said, her tone resolute. She's the one who's been helping Emily with the event planning. If I'm going to be part of this day, I'm going to be at the heart of it. I won't be hidden away in some hospital room. I want to be there, in that venue, surrounded by people who should have noticed me long ago. Megan took a step back, blinking. That's bold. She smiled slowly, her admiration growing. But it could work. Lena's a smart woman. She'll understand the value of this. But you'd have to make it clear to Emily, Diana. She's not going to like it. Diana's mouth curved into a small, determined smile. I'm not doing it for her. Megan gave her an approving nod. All right then, let's do it. The decision was made. An hour later, Diana sat at the kitchen table, the phone pressed to her ear. She waited for the line to connect, her fingers nervously tapping against the wood. She had always been polite with Lena in the past, their conversations always about the details of Emily's parties, a subtle dance of pleasantries and surface-level chatter. But today, Diana was not looking for small talk. Today, she had a plan. Lena, Diana's voice came out smoother than she felt. I need to talk to you about something important. Lena's voice on the other end was bright, as always. Diana, of course. What's on your mind? I've been thinking, Diana said, leaning forward, her eyes narrowing with focus. About my recovery. The surgery day, you know. I don't want to be in a hospital room all day. I'd rather recover in a quiet space at the venue for Emily's party. I need a room, somewhere private, calm, away from the chaos of the celebration. There was a long pause. Well, that's unconventional, Lena finally said, her voice thoughtful. But I can make it work. We've got a couple of smaller rooms reserved for guests who need a break. I'll have them set up for you. You'll have a peaceful space. And you can rest in the heart of the event. Diana felt a rush of relief at Lena's agreement. It wasn't just a room, it was the validation she needed, the acknowledgement that she had a place in this world, on her terms. I'll take care of everything, Lena continued, her tone more supportive now. You'll be the one in control. Diana smiled. Thank you, Lena. The conversation ended, but Diana didn't feel the usual exhaustion after making a difficult call. Instead, there was a surge of energy she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just reclaiming her recovery, she was reclaiming herself. As she hung up the phone, her own phone buzzed again. It was Emily. Hey, Mom, just checking in. Is everything good for the surgery? You feeling all right? Diana glanced at the screen, her heart racing with something like excitement. She tapped the screen slowly, her fingers trembling with the weight of her decision. I'm fine. Everything's good. Just making some plans. She hit send and set the phone down, her breath steadying as she looked out the window. Today, it was no longer about Emily's party. It was about her. And tomorrow, it would be her day. Diana stood by the window, her hand resting on the cool glass, watching as the sunlight hit the pavement outside. The morning was quiet, as it had been for days. But now, the stillness felt different. The hum of the outside world seemed far away, muted by the sound of her own thoughts. She was no longer confined to the plans other people had made for her. She had a new space now, one that was hers, one that she had created. The venue, though buzzing with the undercurrent of Emily's party preparations, had taken on a new life in Diana's mind. It was no longer just a hall meant for celebration, it was her sanctuary, a place where she could find peace, away from the whirlwind of everyone else's expectations. There, she could heal, not just physically, but emotionally too. She had chosen it. She had made it hers. She took a slow, deep breath and turned away from the window. The room Lena had set aside for her was perfect. It was tucked in the corner of the venue behind closed doors, far enough from the main festivities that it would remain undisturbed, but close enough for Diana to feel the pulse of the party, if she so wished. It was the ideal balance. Quiet, but not too isolated. The furniture had already been arranged in a cozy, inviting way. Soft, plush chairs in muted shades of blue and beige were strategically placed to give her a full view of the room, the soft hum of the building's air conditioning creating a gentle, almost soothing backdrop. Quiet, slow music played from the speakers above, nothing too jarring, just instrumental pieces that matched her mood. Peaceful, introspective. A long, simple wooden table was set with fresh flowers, their subtle fragrance hanging in the air, and a delicate, lace cloth draped over it as though to acknowledge the fragility of the moment. But it wasn't just the furniture or the flowers, it was the quiet comfort of it all. Diana could already feel herself sinking into the serenity of the space. It wasn't about the surgery, not anymore. It was about reclaiming the day, about finally making a statement. She stepped further into the room, adjusting a vase just so, and then walked over to the corner, where the sunlight fell in delicate stripes across the floor. She stood there for a moment, soaking it all in, before she heard the door creak open behind her. "Megan?" Diana turned, a small smile playing at her lips. Megan walked in, her eyes widening at the transformation. She had seen the venue when it was empty, just a cavernous hall awaiting the extravagance of Emily's party, but now it was entirely different. Soft, inviting, almost sacred. "Diana," she said quietly, her voice full of admiration, "you've turned this place into something else entirely. This, this is yours." Diana's smile grew, but there was something bittersweet behind it. "It feels like mine, at least. It's the first time I've felt like I belong in a space like this." She paused, eyes falling to the fresh flowers on the table. "All these years, I've made sure everyone else had their space, their moments. It's time for me to have one of my own." Megan stepped closer, bringing a bag of supplies she had promised to bring: pills, a blanket, a book Diana had mentioned. She placed it all down gently on the table, her eyes never leaving her friend. "You deserve this, Diana. I'm glad you're doing this for yourself." Diana nodded, her heart swelling with a quiet, powerful feeling. For once, she wasn't acting out of obligation. For once, she wasn't a footnote in someone else's story. This was hers. As Megan unpacked the items, Diana looked around the room, her gaze tracing the soft curves of the furniture, the floral arrangements, the soft glow of the lighting that had been carefully set to create an atmosphere of calm. She had planned it all so carefully, so meticulously. She wasn't just recovering from surgery, she was setting the tone for her future. She was stepping into a life where she was seen, not as a backdrop, but as the focus. "How's everything with Emily?" Megan asked, her voice more cautious now, as though she could already sense the storm brewing. Diana sighed, walking over to the table and smoothing the cloth once more, a habitual motion that calmed her. "She still thinks this is just about the surgery. She hasn't called me since this morning, and even then, it was just to check in like nothing had changed, like she doesn't even realize what's happening. She still thinks I'll be in that sterile room somewhere, quietly waiting for her to finish her party." Megan's brow furrowed. "You've spent your whole life being invisible to her, haven't you?" Diana stopped moving, the question hitting her like a sudden gust of wind. She took a moment before answering, her voice tinged with a quiet sorrow. Yes, I've spent too many years letting her take center stage, letting Paul take the back seat, letting everyone else think their moments were more important than mine. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to will away the weight of the past. Well, Megan said, her tone shifting to something more determined. It's time to show them, isn't it? This is your time, Diana. No more hiding in the background. Diana nodded slowly, but her mind was already racing ahead. Emily's party would take place. Yes, but it would take place in her world now, not the other way around. Diana was no longer an afterthought in the plans of others. She was the one who had secured the space, her space, and when the day came, she would be the one in control. A sound from the hall interrupted her thoughts, the echo of laughter, the hum of a distant conversation. Diana paused for a moment, listening. The event was already starting to come together. Emily's guests were arriving, the noise and the clamor of it rising in the distance. But Diana wasn't rushing to be a part of that noise. She didn't need to be. Instead, she walked over to the window again, her fingers brushing the curtain back slightly, watching as the venue came to life, just as she had. She didn't belong to the noise. Not anymore. She was creating something far more lasting than a party. She was creating her own legacy, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Diana's phone buzzed again, a message from Emily. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Everything ready for your surgery?" Diana's fingers hovered over the screen, the weight of Emily's words settling heavily in her chest. She took a deep breath, then typed a response. "I'm ready. Everything's taken care of. See you later." She set the phone down, her heart beating a little faster now. It was done. The moment of reckoning was almost here, and she was ready. The day had arrived. Diana awoke to the soft sound of birds outside her window, the first rays of sunlight gently brushing against the edges of the curtains. It was still early. Too early for the world to feel like it was moving at full speed. Too early for anyone to expect anything from her. For the first time in a long time, Diana didn't feel the usual weight of others' expectations pressing down on her. She closed her eyes for a moment, just listening to the quiet. It was her day, and no one could take that from her. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her out of the stillness. She reached for it, her fingers brushing the screen. Emily's message blinked on the screen. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Hope everything's okay with the surgery today. Is everything good on your end?" Diana stared at the message for a beat too long. There was a strange emptiness in Emily's words. Polite, detached, as though she was doing her duty by acknowledging the day. As though this wasn't her mother's surgery, but just another scheduling inconvenience. Diana swallowed, pushed the ache away, and typed a simple reply. "I'm fine. Everything's taken care of. See you later." She set the phone back down. She didn't need more than that. Not from Emily. Not today. The house was quiet. Paul, as always, had left for his morning routine. No fanfare, no questions. He never asked much of Diana, which at one time had been a comfort. Now it felt like something more, a wall between them. The walls of their home seemed to close in as she thought about it, and she shook her head, letting the thoughts float away as she stood and moved to get dressed. The recovery space was waiting. By the time Diana arrived at the venue, it had already been transformed into something she had envisioned. The last traces of the party's setup were still in progress, but her space was a sanctuary in the middle of it all. Calm, quiet, and full of light. The soft lighting from the sconces reflected against the pale walls. The flowers arranged perfectly, their vibrant hues popping against the neutral tones of the room. Diana let the space wash over her, each detail a testament to the decision she had made. Megan was already there, fussing over the setup, adjusting a chair here, smoothing a wrinkle in the throw blanket there. The smell of fresh linen and flowers filled the air, blending seamlessly with the gentle hum of distant chatter and laughter from the party preparations. "You look peaceful," Megan remarked, stepping back as she surveyed the room. "This is your space now, Diana. You did it." Diana smiled, her eyes scanning the space again, feeling the quiet pride that came with taking ownership. This was more than a physical recovery. It was the reclamation of a day, a moment in time she had let slip through her fingers for far too long. "It's perfect," Diana said quietly, the weight of the decision settling comfortably in her chest. She walked over to the small window, pushing the blinds aside just enough to watch the arrival of Emily's guests, their cars slowly trickling in. The sound of their laughter drifted in, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the high-pitched buzz of a microphone being tested for the speeches. Emily's party was well underway, but Diana wasn't a part of it. Not in the way Emily had expected. Megan, noticing the subtle shift in Diana's demeanor, moved to her side. "She doesn't even realize, does she, that this day is about you, too?" Diana's gaze remained fixed on the window, the crowd now growing larger outside. The disconnect between her and the world that was unfolding beyond these walls was palpable. "No, she doesn't. And I don't think she ever will." Her voice held a quiet resignation, but also a deep sense of knowing. She had long accepted that Emily would never see her as anything other than a supporting character in her own grand narrative. But now, Diana was finally writing her own story. Megan put a hand gently on her shoulder, grounding her. "You deserve this, Diana. You've spent so many years making everyone else's life easier, putting yourself last. Now you're here. It's your time." Diana took a deep breath, inhaling the air of her new world. She wasn't just surviving today. She was living it, claiming it with quiet strength. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival, about taking back something she'd given away for far too long. Diana walked across the room, looking around one last time. She noticed the details, the way the flowers seemed to catch the light just right, the soft hum of music that played without intruding. There was nothing too extravagant, nothing demanding attention. It was all hers, a sanctuary of simplicity, a space where she could rest, reflect, and heal. She sat down in the chair, sinking into the cushions, her muscles relaxing for the first time in weeks. She closed her eyes, taking in the quiet, the moment that was all her own. The world outside was moving on without her, but in this room, she had created something no one could take from her. Megan was busy adjusting a few things in the corner, but Diana's mind wandered. She thought about the years she had spent in the background, forgotten, her needs always secondary to those of others. She thought about Emily's endless parties, the social calendar filled with events for everyone but her. But not anymore. Diana's phone buzzed again, and she glanced down to see Emily's name on the screen. "Hey, Mom! Just checking in. Everything good?" She hesitated, watching the screen, but then smiled softly to herself. She had nothing to prove. "Everything's fine. I'm just getting settled. Enjoy your day, Emily." Diana set the phone down again, feeling the quiet power of her decision wash over her once more. She wasn't just recovering physically, she was reclaiming herself. And as the hours passed, she let the silence of the room embrace her. She wasn't invisible here. The world might not understand, but she didn't need them to. This was her choice, her moment, and no one could take it from her. The door to the room creaked open slightly, and Diana glanced up to see Megan, smiling knowingly. "The party's in full swing," Megan said quietly. "But it's your space, Diana. You're in control now." Diana nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. She didn't need to rush. In this room, on this day, she was finally exactly where she was meant to be. Diana sat back in her chair, her body still and comfortable, enveloped in the quiet serenity she had created for herself. The sounds of Emily's party filtered through the walls, distant laughter and music swirling around, but they felt like they belonged to another world. The air in her space was calm, a stark contrast to the clamor just beyond the door. As she let herself sink into the moment, the tension in her muscles eased, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. Diana glanced at it. Another notification from Emily's social media account. She tapped it, the screen filling with pictures of the party unfolding, Emily front and center, as always. The captions were exactly what Diana expected. Best party ever, celebrating me, talk birthday queen, tea living, my best life. The usual hashtags, the usual show of polished, curated perfection. Diana felt a strange, almost hollow sensation as she scrolled. There was a time she had envied the way Emily was always the center of attention, always the one others gravitated to. But now, she simply felt removed, distant. The photos, the posts, they were another version of the world, one where Diana had never existed as anything other than a background character. She closed the app with a sigh, then placed the phone back on the table, its screen facing down. She didn't need to look at it anymore. For now, the only thing she needed to focus on was her space, the peace she had carved out for herself. Diana's quiet moment was interrupted by the soft knock at the door. Megan poked her head inside, her expression filled with quiet excitement. "They're starting to trickle in," she said. "Your guests, I mean. Are you ready?" Diana stood up slowly, stretching her legs, still unfamiliar with the feeling of not being rushed. "Ready as I'll ever be," she said, walking toward the door with a calm smile. She glanced once more at the flowers on the table, the soft lighting, the music, everything in place, everything hers. As Diana stepped into the hallway, she was greeted by a few familiar faces, her closest friends, people who had known her for years, but had always been sidelined by Emily's whirlwind, trickled into her space, their faces lighting up with surprise and admiration. Diana welcomed each of them with a warm smile, offering quiet hospitality, showing them to chairs, and making sure they had everything they needed. "Isn't this just beautiful?" one of her friends murmured, sitting back in the chair, her hands clasped in her lap. "I had no idea you were doing this. It's like an oasis in the middle of everything else." Diana nodded, her heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just a recovery space. This was her statement. This was her moment. It wasn't long before Emily's guests started wandering in as well, curious about the unexpected setup. At first, it was just a few, intrigued by the calmness that contrasted with the chaos of the party outside. But as more people trickled in, the room began to fill. Diana had no intention of shooing them away. She simply smiled, greeting them with a soft, composed elegance, inviting them to stay. One woman, a friend of Emily's from college, lingered at the door, glancing inside, unsure if she was welcome. Diana caught her eye, offering a warm, open smile. "Come in," she said, her voice low and welcoming. "I've set this space aside for quiet. Feel free to join us." As the woman stepped inside, Diana caught the look on her face, a mix of surprise and admiration. She had expected to be hidden away, forgotten. Instead, she had become the very heart of this gathering, drawing people in with her calm presence and quiet strength. Diana leaned back against the wall, watching as more of Emily's guests entered. The room had become a sanctuary of sorts, an unexpected haven from the bustle and noise of the main event. Her guests, her friends and family, had been joined by strangers, all drawn by the simplicity and peace of the space she had created. One of Emily's friends approached, a glass of champagne in hand. This is amazing, she said softly, her voice filled with awe. I didn't expect, well, this. It's so peaceful. It's like a retreat in the middle of the chaos. Diana nodded, her smile warm but knowing. Sometimes it's the quiet spaces that hold the most power, she said gently. Real healing doesn't come from noise and spectacle. It comes from stillness and reflection. The words, simple as they were, carried weight. The group had fallen quiet, each person listening, captivated by the depth of Diana's calm. They weren't just visiting her space, they were connecting with her. Diana glanced out the door briefly toward the party, where Emily was holding court with her usual crowd. Emily hadn't yet noticed the shift. She was too wrapped up in the spectacle of her own celebration, but Diana wasn't concerned with that anymore. Megan appeared at her side, glancing toward the door. Look at that, she murmured, nodding toward the crowd of guests now gathered in Diana's space. They're drawn to you, Diana. It's not the party out there that's holding their attention. It's you. They're listening to you. Diana took a slow, steady breath. She wasn't surprised. This had always been her way. Quiet, powerful, unnoticed by most. But now it wasn't about needing attention. It was about reclaiming something that had always been hers. Respect. Emily finally looked over toward the room, her gaze flicking toward the small gathering in Diana's space. She caught sight of her guests, who were still seated, listening to Diana with rapt attention. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Her eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Her guests, the ones she had invited, were no longer captivated by her. They were captivated by Diana. The party was still going, but something had shifted. Emily didn't know it yet, but the world was no longer revolving around her. It was revolving around Diana. And Diana felt no need to apologize for it. Diana leaned back in her chair, a quiet satisfaction swelling in her chest as she watched the room fill. The hum of the party outside, once so loud and jarring, had faded into the background, replaced by the soft chatter of her guests, all gathered in her peaceful sanctuary. It wasn't just her old friends who had found their way to her. Emily's guests, too, were drifting in, drawn by the serenity of the space she had carefully created. One by one, the people who had been part of Emily's world, the ones who always seemed to surround her, who had always paid more attention to the spectacle of her parties, were slowly abandoning the noise. The sound of clinking glasses, the laughter, and the shrill voices from the party outside had dimmed, swallowed by the calm that Diana had cultivated. Now it was her guests who filled the room, leaning in, their faces illuminated by the soft, warm light that bathed the space. She could feel their attention, their curiosity, and for the first time in years, it wasn't a fleeting glance or an absent-minded nod. They were listening. Megan, standing nearby, caught Diana's eye, a small smile forming on her lips. "Look at this, Diana," she whispered. "You've become the center of the event. This space, it's not just for you. It's for all of them, too." Diana nodded, her eyes scanning the room. The guests, people she had always watched from the sidelines, never quite part of their world, were now fully immersed in hers. She saw the change in their faces, the way they leaned in when she spoke, the way they held their breath when she offered her thoughts. This was more than just a physical space. It was a new role she was playing in their lives, one she hadn't ever expected to take. As the quiet conversation around her deepened, Diana began to speak. She hadn't planned on giving a speech, but somehow it felt right. The words flowed easily, guided by the calmness that had settled over her in the past few hours. "Life," Diana said, her voice carrying a soft but steady authority, "isn't about how loudly you shout or how many people are watching. It's about what you can create in silence. True healing, true growth, comes from knowing your own worth, regardless of who notices. Her words weren't a lesson, but more like a quiet invitation to reflect. They listened, captivated as Diana spoke about her journey, the years of self-neglect, the quiet suffering of being overlooked in her own home, in her own family. But now, she had stepped into her own light, and in that light, she was finally visible, not just to them, but to herself. Diana's voice grew stronger as she continued, reflecting on the power of self-assertion, of making space for oneself in the world when it felt like there was none. The group was still, their attention fixed on her. It was as though the very air in the room had shifted. Now it was Diana's presence that commanded focus, her quiet strength that held the space together. As she spoke, Diana caught sight of Emily from the corner of her eye. Emily had finally made her way toward the doorway, her face flushed with frustration. She surveyed the scene in the room with widening eyes, her guests gathered closely around Diana, their rapt attention a sharp contrast to the noise and chaos outside. Emily's lips tightened as she crossed the threshold, her voice cutting through the calm, sharp, and brittle. "Mom, what's going on in here?" Her words felt like a clamor in the otherwise peaceful space. "This is supposed to be my day, my party. What are you doing? Stealing all of the attention." Diana paused mid-sentence, her gaze meeting Emily's. For a split second, the tension between them hung thick in the air, but Diana held her ground. She didn't feel the usual need to explain herself. "I'm not stealing anything, Emily," Diana said, her voice soft yet firm. "I'm just finally allowing myself to take part in my own life." She offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Maybe it's time you realize that it's not all about you." The words hung in the air, and Emily's face flushed darker, her frustration palpable. She opened her mouth to retort, but Diana didn't give her the chance. Instead, she turned her attention back to the guests in the room, her calm demeanor never breaking. "Sometimes," Diana continued, addressing her guests once more, "we lose sight of what truly matters. We get caught up in the noise and forget that the quiet moments are where we truly find ourselves. If you want to heal, you have to look inward, not outward." The guests nodded, their eyes reflecting the depth of what Diana was saying. It wasn't about her being right. It was about something far more powerful. Diana had claimed her voice, and it resonated in a way nothing else could. Emily, standing at the door now, seemed to shrink as the room remained undisturbed. Her guests were still listening to Diana. They weren't looking at her. They weren't being swept up in her social performance. They were here, in Diana's space, captivated by the calm that she had woven around them. The noise from the party seemed to fade entirely now. Diana had become the center of their attention, not through force or spectacle, but through the quiet power of her presence. She wasn't competing with Emily's party. She was creating something far more lasting. Megan leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you, you're not just surviving today, Diana. You're thriving." And Diana, feeling a quiet triumph, gave her a soft smile. But when her eyes flicked back to Emily, her daughter, still standing awkwardly in the doorway, her frustration growing clearer, Diana felt a strange, almost final sense of closure. The shift had been made, and there was no going back. The room was alive with soft conversation, a steady hum of voices interwoven with the low strains of music. Diana had no need to command attention, it was already hers. Her words, delivered with quiet strength, had become the pulse of this space, and the guests, her guests now, seemed to hang on every word, their eyes reflecting a quiet admiration. In contrast, the chaotic sound of Emily's party outside had begun to feel distant, irrelevant. Diana could feel it in the air, the shift, the change. People were gravitating toward her. One by one, Emily's guests, who had previously hovered on the periphery of her space, started to settle in more comfortably. They weren't simply hearing Diana's words, they were feeling them. The energy in the room had shifted, and Diana, through sheer presence, had become the center of the event. Megan was at her side again, smiling softly as she watched the room. "You've done it," she said, her voice quiet but full of awe. "You've created a space that people can't resist." Diana met her friend's gaze, offering a small but knowing smile. She hadn't created this space for applause, she had created it for herself. But now, it seemed, it was giving others something they hadn't expected. Peace, clarity, a moment to pause in the middle of a whirlwind, and they were responding to it. Guests started to compliment her, their words soft, sincere. "You've built something beautiful here," one of Emily's longtime friends said, her tone warm and genuine. "I didn't know you had this side of you, Diana. It's incredible. I feel so much more centered just being here." Diana smiled and accepted their praise with grace, not out of obligation, but because it felt right. For so long, she had been the one behind the scenes, keeping things together for everyone else. Today, though, her calm was its own reward, and she allowed herself to receive the recognition. She had earned it. But as the room filled with compliments and quiet admiration, Diana couldn't ignore the subtle change in the energy outside. She could hear Emily's voice rising above the others, trying to regain control, trying to call people back to her party. But the power she had always wielded through spectacle, through her party planning skills, her social media posts, her flashy persona, wasn't enough anymore. The noise of Emily's world seemed to crumble against the quiet strength of Diana's presence. The guests weren't paying attention to Emily anymore. They had all come to Diana's space, seeking something more than what Emily's chaotic spectacle could offer. Diana watched as a group of Emily's friends glanced at each other, their discomfort palpable as they lingered in the doorway of the room, clearly uncertain of how to re-enter the main event. With hesitant steps, they made their way toward Diana, joining the circle that had formed around her. Diana greeted them with a calm nod, offering them a seat, allowing them to stay without force. They were no longer lost in the whirlwind of Emily's party. They were here, in the stillness, the center of something real. One by one, the people who had once gravitated toward Emily's boisterous energy now found solace in Diana's quiet confidence. A few, who had been standing awkwardly near the edges of Emily's gathering, now turned their attention to Diana, catching her gaze and allowing themselves to be drawn in. Diana wasn't aware of it, not at first, but the ripple effect was undeniable. Guests who had been fully engaged in Emily's celebration were now seated in Diana's sanctuary, murmuring to each other about the calm that had washed over them. The laughter from the other room faded into the background, as if the moment had shifted beyond repair. Emily had always been the star, the center of attention. But now, Diana, with no more than a presence, had effortlessly taken the role she had been denied for so long. She was no longer the supporting character in someone else's life. She was the main event. Through the corner of her eye, Diana saw Emily approach again, this time with a tighter jaw, her steps more determined. But there was no commanding presence in Emily's stride, no control, only frustration. "Mom, what's going on here?" Emily's voice was sharper now, a thin thread of irritation woven through her words. "You've got people here, my people, and you're distracting them from my party." Diana's gaze remained steady, the quiet power of the space holding her in place. "It's not about you, Emily," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that cut through the tension. "This is about them, about finding peace, even in the chaos." Emily's face flushed a deep crimson, but she didn't have the words to respond. She stood frozen, her gaze flicking between the guests who had left her side and Diana's calm, unyielding presence. Diana's guests, those who had been caught up in Emily's world, were no longer looking to her for entertainment or applause. They were now drawn to something deeper, something quieter. They wanted wisdom, understanding, a moment to breathe. And Diana had offered that, without asking for anything in return. Megan leaned in, her voice low but filled with an unmistakable edge of pride. "Look at her, Diana. She can't even get her guests back. They've chosen you. You've done what they couldn't." Diana felt a quiet satisfaction ripple through her. She had done nothing extraordinary. She had simply been herself, finally stepping into the light she had been waiting for. The world might not have noticed her before, but now, in the quiet space she had created, they were drawn to her. And they stayed. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Emily, still standing by the door, her face pinched with frustration, looked once more at the growing circle of people surrounding Diana. They weren't coming back to her. They weren't rushing to hear her. Emily's power had faded, swallowed by the quiet strength Diana had always held within her. The shift was complete. Diana was no longer just in the background. She had become the heart of the event, the quiet queen who didn't need to shout to be seen. And Emily, standing alone in the doorway, finally realized something Diana had known all along. Power, true power, doesn't come from control. It comes from presence, Diana's presence, and there was nothing Emily could do to change it. The door to the recovery space slammed open with a force that startled the room. Diana didn't need to look up to know who it was. She could feel the tension before the figure fully emerged. Emily stood in the doorway, her eyes blazing, her posture stiff with the kind of anger that only came from years of being used to being the center of attention. "Mom!" Emily's voice was sharp, cutting through the calm like a knife. "What do you think you're doing?" Her words tumbled out in a rush, thick with frustration. "This is my day. You can't just barge in here taking everything from me." Diana, seated in her chair, remained perfectly still. The words didn't sting as they once would have. Instead, she let them pass over her, like a wave washing over a rock. Her expression was calm, her posture unyielding. She didn't need to shout back. She didn't need to match Emily's anger. The guests who had once been caught up in Emily's spectacle fell silent at the tension that was now palpable in the room. They shifted, watching the confrontation unfold before them. The shift had happened so gradually they hadn't realized it until now. The party outside was a distant memory, and they were now drawn in, captivated by the quiet strength of the woman who had, without asking, taken the reins of the day. Diana raised an eyebrow but didn't move from her seat. "I'm not stealing anything, Emily," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "I'm just reclaiming something that was always mine." Emily's face reddened, her hands trembling as she balled them into fists. "This isn't about you. This is my birthday, my celebration. You've made everything about you, and I've had to watch you, again, take everything from me." She stepped closer, pointing a finger at Diana. "You can't just walk in here and hijack my day, my party. Do you know how embarrassing this is?" The guests in the room shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Diana could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to respond. But she didn't rush. She let the silence hang for a moment, feeling the weight of Emily's words, watching as the younger woman's frustration grew. But Diana wouldn't be swayed. "Emily," Diana said, her tone still calm, her eyes meeting her daughter's. "It's never been about you. It's never been only about your party, your spotlight, your friends. You've taken everything from me for years. My time, my energy, my quiet. I've spent my life making sure everyone else was happy, and I never stopped to think about what I needed." She let that sink in, watching as Emily's face twisted with confusion and anger. Emily's voice wavered slightly as she tried again, her tone sharp but with a tinge of desperation. "You always put yourself last. That's just how you are, Mom. Why can't you just let me have this? Just for once? She took a step closer, her expression pleading now. Please, Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you. This is just my day, and I've been planning it for so long. Don't make me feel guilty about it. Diana didn't flinch, didn't waver. She sat back, hands folded neatly in her lap, watching her daughter with the same calm intensity that had anchored her through years of feeling invisible. Don't manipulate me, Emily, Diana said, her voice quieter but still strong. I'm not going to be your pawn anymore. You can't guilt me into taking a back seat. Not today. Not ever again. I didn't steal your day. She leaned forward, her gaze locking with Emily's. I made it mine. There was a long pause as the words settled between them, the quiet in the room growing thicker. Emily stood frozen, her chest rising and falling with the rapid breaths she was taking. Her mouth opened, then closed, her anger seemingly drained by the weight of Diana's words. For the first time, Diana saw her daughter for what she truly was, a young woman who had spent her life accustomed to everyone bending to her will, without ever questioning the cost. But Diana wasn't bending anymore. Emily's face turned a shade darker. The flush of frustration now accompanied by a hint of something else. Embarrassment. Her eyes flicked to the guests who had been watching with a mix of discomfort and curiosity, their attention no longer on her, but on the quiet woman who had found her voice. I didn't mean, Emily started, but her words faltered, as though she had no idea what to say next. Her frustration was still there, but now it was masked with an uncertainty that Diana had never seen before. Emily didn't have an answer. Diana remained calm, her presence unmoving. She didn't need to argue anymore. The shift had happened. The room had chosen its center. And it wasn't Emily. Megan, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward now, breaking the tension with a soft but firm voice. Emily, she said, it's time to accept what's happening. People are here because they want to be. Diana has created something real here, and no one is going back to the chaos outside. You've had your moment, and now it's time to let your mom have hers. Emily didn't respond. Her shoulders dropped slightly, the anger in her stance finally starting to unravel. She stood there for a moment longer, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for something to say, something to reclaim. But there was nothing left to take. The power had already shifted, and Emily knew it. The door behind her hung slightly ajar, the sounds of the party still echoing faintly through the walls. But in this room, Diana was in control. The moment was hers, and there was no going back. Diana sat in the center of the room, surrounded by guests who, for the first time, had come to her with genuine interest and admiration. The gentle hum of conversation filled the space, but there was no mistaking the undercurrent of support that flowed through the room, thick with the weight of the shift that had just taken place. They were here, not because they had to be, but because they wanted to be. Emily had stormed in, but it hadn't been enough. Diana had reclaimed her power, not through loud confrontation, but with quiet confidence and unwavering presence. And now Emily was just another figure on the periphery, trying to find her way back into a space that no longer centered on her. Diana, as she had always done, had remained calm and centered in the eye of the storm, unshaken by the chaos that surrounded her. Megan leaned in, her voice low but filled with pride. "They're with you, Diana," she said, her eyes flicking to the group of people who had gathered around the table, seated comfortably in Diana's carefully curated space. "This is your moment, and you're not letting them take it." Diana nodded, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. She hadn't expected this moment to feel so complete, but it did. Every inch of this space, from the soft lighting to the scent of the flowers, every guest who had chosen to stay, and every word of wisdom she had shared, it was hers. The healing had begun. not just for her, but for those around her. Outside the room, however, the party's energy had shifted. Diana could hear the muffled sounds of Emily's voice, rising above the others, trying to pull her guests back into the fold. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the chaotic buzz that had once seemed like the pulse of the event now felt hollow in comparison to the quiet strength that had blossomed in this space. Emily's voice, strained with frustration, cut through the air like an attempt at regaining what she had lost. Diana didn't need to see her to know what was happening. She could hear the desperation in Emily's tone, trying to rally her guests back to her. But the shift was undeniable. "Come on, you've all had a great time here," Emily was saying, her voice louder now. "Let's get back to the party. This place is just for quiet people." Diana felt a pang of sadness for her daughter, but it was fleeting. This moment was not about Emily. It was about Diana, about what she had taken back for herself, and what she had finally allowed herself to see. Megan glanced toward the door, where the sounds of Emily's voice grew louder. "She's not going to stop trying, you know," Megan said, her tone sympathetic. "But she can't take this away from you. You've earned this." Diana took a deep breath, feeling the room steady around her. Her voice was steady as she spoke, a calm ripple in the midst of the storm. "It's her party," Diana said, her gaze sweeping over her guests. "But I'm not going to let her make me invisible again. Not today. Not ever again." Megan smiled, placing a hand on Diana's shoulder. "I'm so proud of you." At that moment, a few of Emily's guests began to leave the main event. Some of them had already come to Diana, seeking out her space, finding comfort in her words and the calm atmosphere she had created. But now, a few more made their way toward the door, exchanging looks as they left Emily behind. They didn't seem to mind the undercurrent of tension outside. They simply chose to stay in Diana's sanctuary. One by one, they left the noise of the party behind, gravitating toward the space Diana had carved out. And then, to Diana's surprise, one of Emily's closest friends, a woman with a sharp edge to her usually impeccable composure, stepped into the room. She had a hesitant look on her face, as though she wasn't sure whether to stay or return to the chaos. But after a moment of hesitation, she walked over to Diana, her eyes softening as she took a seat next to her. "This is incredible," the woman said quietly. "I didn't expect this from you, Diana. I really didn't." Diana smiled, a warm but knowing smile. "Sometimes we all need to step into the silence to truly hear what matters." The woman nodded, visibly moved, and for the first time since Diana had known her, she saw this guest for what she was. Someone who had been waiting for a space like this. Someone who, like Diana, had been lost in the noise for far too long. As the guests settled back into the room, Diana glanced toward the door once again. Emily was still standing there, her face flushed with humiliation and frustration. The realization that she was losing control of her own party was written clearly on her features. Her guests, her people, were no longer responding to her. They were looking to Diana for the calm they had craved all evening. The imbalance had shifted, and Emily couldn't bear it. Diana remained poised, unwavering, her presence commanding yet gentle. "Megan," she said softly, "let's make a toast." Megan, who had been watching the unfolding drama with a quiet sense of satisfaction, raised an eyebrow but nodded. "A toast? To what?" "To peace," Diana said, her voice steady. "To reclaiming our own moments, and to the strength that comes when we finally stop letting the noise define us." Megan smiled and made her way to the table, gathering the guests around, her movements sure and confident. As she filled a glass, Diana stood and raised her own. The room grew quiet as everyone turned their attention toward her. "To reclaiming our moments," Diana said, her voice carrying through the room, full of quiet strength. and to the peace that comes with knowing who we really are. The room echoed with the soft clinking of glasses. There was a sense of solidarity now, an unspoken agreement that they, too, were part of this transformation. Diana didn't just reclaim her day, she had made a statement, one that no one could take from her. She was the one who had brought them all together, the one who had shown them that peace was more powerful than spectacle. Emily, standing outside the door, clenched her jaw and looked away, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had tried to regain control, but it was already too late. The guests had chosen their side. They had chosen Diana. And as the room fell into a comfortable silence, Diana knew that the moment was hers, fully and completely. The day had moved slowly, with the kind of calm that only comes after a storm. The party outside the room was now little more than a distant hum, irrelevant to the quiet space Diana had created for herself and her guests. They had chosen to stay, choosing peace over chaos, connection over spectacle. But as the hours passed, Diana began to feel something new stir inside her. A sense of purpose, something deeper than reclaiming the day for herself. She had survived. She had faced Emily's storm and in doing so, had found a quiet strength she had long forgotten. But now it was time to turn this strength into something lasting, something more than just a moment of personal triumph. She stood up slowly, the movement deliberate and filled with quiet intention. Her eyes scanned the room once more. Her guests were scattered around, some still engaged in conversation, others lost in thought. Megan and Lena were by the table, chatting quietly, but Diana could see the way they kept glancing toward her, waiting for her next move. They had witnessed her transformation, the way she had taken control without ever raising her voice in anger. Diana approached them, her heart pounding with the weight of what she was about to say. It wasn't just about her anymore. She was ready to give something back, to create something that would outlast this day, this moment. Megan, Lena, she began, her voice steady but filled with purpose. I've been thinking. This day, this moment. It can't just be about me. It needs to be about something greater. Something that will help others who've felt as invisible as I've felt for so long. Megan looked up at her, her eyes bright with curiosity. What are you thinking, Diana? Diana paused for a moment, the idea taking shape in her mind, the vision crystallizing. I want to create a scholarship, a foundation in Greg's name, focused on women who are overcoming adversity. Women who've been overlooked, ignored, or forgotten. I want to help them find their voice, just like I've found mine today. Lena's eyes widened as she took in Diana's words. That's incredible, Diana. You found your purpose, and I think it's going to help so many women who need someone to believe in them. Diana nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of excitement and calm determination. I think it's time I turn this recovery into something more than just a personal journey. It's time to give back, to build something that can empower others. Megan stepped forward, placing a hand on Diana's arm. You're not just talking about a scholarship. You're talking about creating a legacy, Diana. This is your moment. Your real moment. Diana smiled, feeling the weight of Megan's words settle over her. For so long, she had felt as though her life had been on the sidelines, always waiting for someone else's spotlight. But now, with this idea, she was finally stepping into the light. Not as a supporting character, but as the author of her own story. She was creating something that would live beyond this day. I want to start this today, Diana said, her voice growing stronger. I want to announce it, here, in front of all these people who have supported me, who've chosen to stand by me. I don't want to wait anymore. Megan and Lena exchanged a quick glance, and then both nodded in agreement. We're with you, Megan said. Let's make this happen. Diana felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She wasn't alone in this anymore. The people around her, the ones who had chosen her, were ready to help her make this vision a reality. The quiet space she had created had become more than just a retreat. It had become the starting point for something far bigger than herself. She turned to face the guests, who had gathered in small groups, chatting quietly, basking in the afterglow of the calm that had settled over the room. Diana's heart beat in steady rhythm, the weight of what she was about to do filling her with a sense of purpose she had never known. "Excuse me, everyone," Diana called, her voice carrying across the room. The guests stopped talking and turned toward her, their faces expectant. "I have something I'd like to share. Something I've decided to do. Something I've been thinking about for a long time." The room fell silent, and for the first time, Diana felt like the center of attention in the best possible way. She wasn't nervous. This wasn't about Emily or anyone else. This was about her and her future. "I've decided to create a scholarship in Greg's name for women overcoming adversity. For women like me, like so many of us, who have spent their lives waiting for a chance to be seen, to be heard." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "This is my way of giving back, of making sure others don't have to wait as long as I did to find their voice." A ripple of applause spread through the room, and Diana felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was real. This was happening. Later, as the evening wound down, Diana sat in a quiet corner, a journal in her hands. She had written so many things in this journal over the years: hopes, dreams, fears. But this was different. This time, she wasn't writing for anyone else. She wasn't writing to keep her thoughts hidden away. She was writing for herself. "I survived this day," Diana wrote, her pen moving across the page with steady determination. "And I made it mine." She smiled as she closed the journal, feeling the weight of the day settle into a place of peace. She had come into this day uncertain, unsure of what the future held. But now, she was creating it, and nothing would take that from her. The legacy had begun, and Diana Hayes was finally living the life she had always deserved. The ripple from Diana's scholarship announcement was immediate and far-reaching, like a stone thrown into still water. For a moment, the room seemed to breathe as one collective exhale. Diana's words, spoken with such quiet determination, had hung in the air long after the applause had faded, and in that silence, something profound had shifted. The noise and chaos of Emily's party felt like a distant memory now, drowned out by the quiet strength Diana had embraced. As the guests mingled, their attention now fully on Diana and her inspiring journey, Emily remained at the periphery of the room, standing alone, her face flushed with a cocktail of humiliation and anger. Her carefully constructed image of success, her orchestrated party, had fallen apart, overshadowed by Diana's quiet revelation. Emily's attempt to recapture the spotlight had failed before it even began. She turned toward the door of the recovery space, her lips pressed tightly together, and made her way back to the main event, where the remnants of her failed celebration lay scattered around. She tried to force a smile, greeting her few remaining guests with forced cheer. "This is still a great party," she said, her voice strained, the words feeling hollow. "We'll get this back on track, don't worry." But no one was listening. A few polite smiles greeted her efforts, but the excitement from earlier was gone. People were still drifting into Diana's space, and Emily's guests, those who had lingered in her room for even a moment, now drifted away, choosing the calm of Diana's corner over the chaos of her own mother's party. From where Diana sat, she could see Emily's failed attempts at reclaiming the attention she so desperately needed. Her voice, high-pitched and insistent, had no weight behind it. People who had been swarming around her like moths to a flame were now choosing silence, reflection, and connection instead of Emily's polished but empty spectacle. Megan leaned in, her voice a quiet murmur in Diana's ear. "It's over for her, isn't it?" she said, her eyes flicking toward Emily, who was still trying to rally what little attention she could muster from her dwindling crowd. "She can't fix it. You've already turned this day into something real." Diana smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. Though she knew this moment wasn't just about triumph, it was about transformation. She had never wanted this day to be about winning, but seeing Emily's efforts fall flat, seeing the contrast between the shallow sparkle of her daughter's spectacle and the deep, heartfelt change she had sparked, filled Diana with a quiet satisfaction. The room was hers. As Diana spoke more with her guests, sharing stories of how far she had come, how much she had learned about herself, she could see that they were drawn not to the things Emily had once relied on: the glamour, the perfection, the carefully orchestrated entertainment. They were drawn to something deeper. They were drawn to her, to the woman who had finally stopped hiding, who had reclaimed what was hers. Meanwhile, outside, Emily's attempts to salvage the remnants of her birthday were becoming increasingly desperate. She plastered a smile on her face, snapping pictures with anyone still willing to engage. She uploaded them to social media, every post more strained than the last. "Best party ever. So grateful for all my amazing friends. Cha, birthday queen, Cha's living my best life." Read one post, accompanied by a selfie where Emily's smile looked almost too wide, her eyes betraying the frustration behind them. Another post boasted about how grateful she was for the day, as though all the attention was still hers to claim. But Diana knew the truth, and so did the people in the room. Emily's words, her captions, her posts, none of them held the weight of reality. Everyone could see it now: the emptiness of the spectacle, the shallow nature of the party, and the growing chasm between Emily's social media persona and the truth of the moment. The carefully curated life she had put on display was cracking, and those who had once been so eager to be part of it were now aware of the hollowness that lay beneath. Diana, on the other hand, was becoming an embodiment of something far more lasting than anything Emily could craft. Her words, her scholarship, the way she had turned this moment into a catalyst for change. These were the things that would endure. Diana wasn't just posting a moment to a timeline, she was building a future, one that would last far longer than the fleeting image Emily tried to create. Later, Diana sat in the quiet of her space, taking a moment to reflect. The noise from Emily's party had completely faded. The guests who had chosen her space were now all sitting in peaceful reflection, some talking quietly, others simply basking in the warmth of Diana's presence. She had never thought this day would end like this, but she had embraced every minute of it. Megan joined her, sitting down beside her with a glass of wine in her hand. "You've done it, Diana," Megan said, her voice filled with admiration. "You've turned your recovery into a legacy. You've shown everyone what true strength is." Diana took a slow sip from her own glass, her eyes glancing over to where Emily was now surrounded by only a handful of guests. The contrast was so stark. Emily's party was dead in the water, reduced to an image of desperation. And here, in this room, Diana had created something real. "I didn't steal her day, Megan," Diana said softly, her gaze fixed on the room around her. "I made it mine." The moment stretched on, quiet and full of promise. There was no need for words anymore. Diana had found her place in the world, her voice, her strength. And now she had begun to build a legacy that would carry her far beyond this day, far beyond anything Emily could ever hope to create. And as Emily's social media posts continued to gather likes, the comments remained empty. People saw through the facade, their awareness growing. In the end, Emily's attempt at regaining control had failed, and Diana had succeeded, in ways that would last a lifetime. The legacy had begun, and there was no going back. The days following Diana's announcement felt like a slow, quiet unraveling of the life she had once lived. Recovery wasn't just a physical act anymore. It was a reinvention. Every step she took, every new decision she made, led her further away from the life she had known and deeper into the woman she was becoming. The strength she had found that day was now carrying her toward a future she had long overlooked. Megan and Lena were her pillars. They helped her organize the community event she had envisioned, a celebration of real recovery stories. It was to be a day where people who had struggled, who had overcome their own personal battles, could come together and share their triumphs, their failures, and most importantly, their humanity. They weren't looking for pity, they were looking for solidarity. Diana had finally found that solidarity in herself, and now she wanted to give it to others. As the days went by, Diana's story began to take on a life of its own. News of the scholarship, of her quiet strength, spread, and she was invited to speak at recovery events across the country. It was surreal. She had always been the one in the background, the one supporting others. But now, people were reaching out to her. Diana had become the one who inspired, the one who had stepped into the light. She was no longer the one who quietly faded into the background. She was the one shining. And Emily? Emily was still trying to salvage the party, still posting incessantly on social media. Her latest updates were an attempt to make it seem like her birthday had been a resounding success, even as the comments from friends and followers dwindled, showing more disinterest than support. Her latest post, a picture of her holding a drink, eyes wide with a forced smile, read, "A birthday to remember, so blessed for all the love. Birthday Queen. Feeling grateful." But no one seemed to be buying it anymore. The posts were met with a sea of silence, a stark contrast to the attention she was accustomed to receiving. Emily's attempts at recovery were becoming painfully obvious. She still couldn't understand why the attention had shifted from her to Diana. Her jealousy simmered beneath the surface, a bitterness that she couldn't shake off. And the more she tried to reclaim what she felt was hers, the more obvious it became that she was failing. Diana felt no need to comment on it. She had already moved past the hurt. She had already found her voice, and her life was finally aligned with her truth. Emily's hollow efforts, her desperate need to perform for an audience, seemed irrelevant. Diana had created something real, something that didn't need validation from anyone else. The support she had received, the people who had chosen to stay in her space, the ones who had listened to her story and been inspired by her courage, was worth more than any fleeting social media post or empty applause. One evening, after a day of planning and reflecting, Diana received a message from Emily. It was a simple text, devoid of the usual deflections or manipulations, but it felt hollow, just like her attempts to regain control of the party. "Hey Mom, I'm really sorry about everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to have a good day. I know it wasn't fair. Can we talk soon?" Diana stared at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. There was no anger in her, no desire for confrontation. Instead, there was a quiet, almost wistful understanding. Emily was still trapped in the need to be the center of attention, still clinging to the idea that her world revolved around her. And that was something Diana couldn't fix for her. She set the phone down, a slight smile forming on her lips. Diana had no intention of going back to the past. There was nothing to fix, nothing to explain. She had made her choice. She had reclaimed her life. And no apology, no matter how sincere, could change that. "Megan," Diana said later that night as she poured herself a glass of water, "I think I'm finally ready to let go. I've spent so many years trying to make everyone else happy, trying to stay in the background. I've lived in Emily's shadow for far too long." Megan, sitting across the table, gave her a soft smile. "It's about time, Diana. You've earned this." The night grew quiet. Filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of glasses, Diana felt a peace settle over her that she hadn't known in years. The weight of the past, the constant need to make herself small for the sake of others, was lifting. She didn't need to chase validation anymore. She had finally claimed her space. Emily's apology still sat unread on her phone, but Diana had already made up her mind. She didn't need to respond. There was nothing left to prove. She was moving forward, building something real. A legacy of empowerment and strength that didn't require anyone's approval. And as Diana looked out the window, the last light of the day fading into the horizon, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had survived. She had lived. And now, for the first time in her life, she was truly free. Diana smiled softly to herself, reaching for her journal. She wrote as she always had, but this time the words came with a new confidence, a sense of peace that was finally hers to keep. I survived this day, and I made it mine. The legacy she had started to build was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a reality, one that would last far beyond the empty parties, the hollow posts, and the fleeting attention. Diana's story was just beginning, and this time, the world was listening. Weeks passed, and with each day Diana felt the pull of recovery, not just from the surgery, but from the life she had always lived in the shadow of others. She wasn't just healing physically, her soul was healing too. Every step forward felt lighter, more assured, as if she were finally walking in her own truth, no longer weighed down by the expectations of those around her. Her health improved steadily. She had once been terrified of the quiet aftermath of surgery, unsure of what it would feel like to sit in stillness without the noise of daily life to drown out her thoughts. But the stillness had become her friend. It was no longer a space of fear, but of reflection. Diana's body was stronger now, each day a small victory, as she pushed herself a little further, as she let go of the old parts of herself that no longer served her. And then, the calls started coming, the emails, the invitations. It was surreal at first. Diana had never been the one in the spotlight, never the one to be asked to share her story. But now, her phone was buzzing constantly. Recovery events across the country wanted her to speak, to share how she had navigated the storm of her own life and emerged on the other side stronger than before. Diana stared at the latest email, an invitation to speak at a national conference on overcoming adversity. She had been overwhelmed when the first few came in, unsure if it was a fluke. But now it was real. She was being asked to speak, to be heard. "I can't believe this is happening," she murmured to herself, her hand hovering over the reply button. The words felt surreal. Her story, the one she had kept hidden for so long, was now something others wanted to hear. It felt empowering. But more than that, it felt like the next step in a journey she was still figuring out. Megan called later that day, her voice filled with excitement. "Diana, I just saw the invite. A national recovery conference? This is incredible. You're going to inspire so many people." Diana smiled softly. "It feels unreal. I never thought I'd be someone people would look to for answers." "You already are, Diana. You've been showing up for yourself, and now the world is noticing. You're a symbol of strength, of what it means to truly heal. You're not just surviving anymore. You're thriving." Megan's words were a balm, soothing and reassuring. Diana had never thought of herself as a beacon of anything, least of all strength. But as she reflected on everything that had happened, everything she had come through, she realized that Megan was right. She had become something more than she ever imagined. She had become a voice of empowerment, a symbol of recovery. And that felt like a responsibility she was ready to shoulder. Meanwhile, Emily's attempts to regain control of the narrative had continued, though with less and less impact. Diana's quiet resilience had overshadowed her attempts, and the ripple of Diana's journey had grown, reaching far beyond that failed birthday party. Emily had sent another message, one filled with apologies and pleas for reconciliation. Diana had read it, but her finger never hovered over the reply button. The apology felt too little, too late. There was nothing left to say. The years of manipulation, the years of being overshadowed had come to an end. Diana had already moved on. She was no longer waiting for Emily's approval. She had taken control of her own life, and in doing so, had reclaimed the power she had always deserved. With every email that arrived, every invitation to speak, Diana's confidence grew. She was being seen for the first time in her life, not as Emily's mother or as the quiet one, but as Diana Hayes, a woman who had stepped out of the shadows and into the light. Her story was bigger than her family. It was about what it meant to be human, how to face life's toughest battles and still rise, still stand strong. One afternoon, while sitting by the window in her favorite chair, Diana felt a pull deep within her. She had always loved writing, kept journals for years, but had never considered that her story could be something more than just words on a page. But now, the idea seemed obvious. She had something to say, something that could help others. Her healing had not just been for her, it was a message she could pass on. Diana picked up her pen and began to write. The first words came slowly, then faster as the memories, the feelings, the lessons began to pour out. She wasn't just writing for herself anymore. She was writing for all the women who had felt invisible, for all the mothers who had sacrificed their own needs, for those who had suffered in silence. She was writing for everyone who had been overlooked in the name of someone else's spotlight. "I've spent my life trying to make everyone else's dreams come true," Diana wrote, "but I've learned, at last, that my dreams deserve to be realized too. This is my story of how I reclaim my voice. It's not just about my recovery. It's about the power of owning your truth and fighting for it every single day." As Diana wrote, she realized the truth. She wasn't just telling her story. She was beginning to write a legacy of empowerment, of standing up when no one else did, and of showing the world that it's never too late to reclaim your life. The phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from a woman Diana had spoken to at a recent event. "Thank you for sharing your story. You've given me the strength to start my own journey of recovery. I never thought I could do it, but now I believe I can. You are truly an inspiration." Tears welled in Diana's eyes as she read the message. It wasn't just about the people who had applauded her. It was about the quiet messages, the whispers of gratitude from those who had been touched by her courage. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the women who needed it. Emily's party had come and gone, forgotten in the wake of Diana's transformation. And while Emily continued to struggle with her own self-obsession, Diana's legacy was just beginning to grow, rippling out into the world, inspiring others to heal, to reclaim their power, and to live their truth. The healing she had started could never be stopped, and neither could her story. Diana's journey had taken on a life of its own, one she never could have imagined in the quiet of her recovery room. The book she had written was finished now, her story, her healing, her voice laid bare for the world to see. She could hardly believe it. What started as a simple desire to share her journey had turned into something far more powerful, a movement, a message of strength. Not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been silenced, every person who had ever felt invisible. Her first speaking engagement had been a modest affair, a local event for a small recovery group. But it had grown from there. The offers continued to pour in, more speaking engagements, more invitations to share her story, to inspire others. It was surreal, exhilarating, and humbling all at once. Diana stood backstage before her first major keynote address at a national conference. She could hear the murmurs of the crowd filtering through the walls, feel the hum of excitement outside the room. The thought of addressing so many people used to terrify her. But now, as she straightened her posture, the nerves she had once experienced were replaced by calm confidence. "I've survived," she whispered to herself, the words steady and grounding. "And now, I'm going to share that strength." When she stepped onto the stage, the applause was immediate. It was no longer the polite applause of acquaintances or distant acquaintances. It was the kind of applause that comes from people who feel seen, who feel understood. Diana spoke for an hour, telling her story, sharing the lessons she had learned from years of silence, years of living for others. She spoke about the power of recovery, about how real strength is built not in ease, but through the fire of adversity. The audience was riveted, leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word. Diana felt the connection. She was no longer just speaking to an audience. She was speaking with them. They were with her, understanding her pain, her journey, and the strength she had found along the way. By the time the event ended, the energy in the room was palpable. People lined up to meet her, offering words of gratitude, sharing their own stories of struggle and recovery. Diana stood there for hours, listening, offering encouragement, knowing that she had given them something far more valuable than just a story. She had given them hope. Back home, Diana's life had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had become a fixture in the motivational speaking circuit, her book flying off shelves, her story inspiring people from all walks of life. She had never imagined this for herself. Her recovery wasn't just about her healing, it was about igniting something in others. Meanwhile, Emily's life continued, but it seemed to shrink by the day. Diana had no interest in knowing every detail, but it was hard to miss the contrast between their two paths. Emily's social media, once a vibrant showcase of her curated life, had begun to lose its shine. The followers who had once hung on her every word now seemed disinterested, their comments fewer and fewer. Emily still posted, her carefully staged photos, her endless attempts at regaining control, but they had lost their power. Diana's influence continued to grow. She appeared on talk shows, was invited to panels, and even began hosting her own workshops on empowerment and recovery. She had found a new purpose, a purpose that brought her fulfillment and joy. She was no longer the woman in the background. She was the one standing in front of the room, guiding others to find their own voice, their own strength. As Diana's health improved, so did her sense of peace. She woke up each morning with gratitude, not just for the life she was living, but for the life she had created. She had stepped into her power, and nothing was going to take that from her. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, but they no longer had the power to derail her. She had become the woman she had always hoped to be, the one who had found her own voice and refused to let anyone silence her. And then, there was Emily. Emily had tried reaching out, a few more times, but the distance was too wide now. Diana had moved on. Emily's world had stayed the same, wrapped in the same desperate need for approval, the same selfish desire to control. She was still chasing something, some validation, some acknowledgement, but it had become clear to everyone, including herself, that the world had moved past her. The spotlight that had once been hers was now reserved for those who didn't need to chase it, for those who, like Diana, had learned that true strength came from within. One morning, Diana received a message from an old friend who had watched the transformation from the sidelines. "I've seen what you've done, Diana, what you've built. It's incredible. You've given me the courage to start my own journey. Thank you." Diana smiled, a soft, genuine smile as she read the words. She could feel the weight of the message. Her story had become a lifeline for others. People were no longer looking to her for guidance. They were finding their own strength, their own voice, because of her. As the months went by, Emily faded into the background. Her posts became more sporadic, her presence less and less noticeable. She was still there, but the world had already moved on. Diana, on the other hand, had created something that would last. She was no longer just a mother or a wife or someone's supporting character. She had built a legacy, a story of survival, strength, and the power of self-assertion. And as she stood before crowds sharing her journey, she realized that the life she had reclaimed wasn't just hers. It was for everyone who had ever been overlooked, silenced, or forgotten. Emily's story was fading. Diana's was just beginning. And as Diana's influence grew, she knew that nothing would stop her from continuing the journey she had started, one step at a time. Diana stood in front of the crowd, her heart pounding, but not from fear. The spotlight that had once felt blinding now seemed like a gentle embrace, a symbol of the journey she had taken. She was no longer the woman who hid in the shadows, who sacrificed her own needs for the sake of others. She was the woman who had risen, reclaimed her voice, and now she stood before a room full of people, people who had come to hear her story, her truth. The applause echoed in her ears, but it didn't overwhelm her. This wasn't about the applause. It was about what it meant. It was about everything she had fought for, everything she had endured. She had made it. She had survived the hardest chapter of her life, and now she was telling the world how she had done it. "I'm Diana Hayes," she began, her voice steady and clear, "and I am not the woman I used to be." The room fell silent, the audience hanging on her every word. Diana's voice filled the space, not with the tremors of uncertainty, but with the strength of someone who had finally found peace within herself. "I spent years living in the background," she continued, "always putting others first, always letting my own needs fall to the side. But I realized something that changed everything. If you don't take care of yourself, no one else will. If you don't show up for yourself, how can you expect anyone else to?" As she spoke, Diana looked out over the sea of faces, each one watching her, waiting for her to continue. And she did. She spoke about the pain of being overlooked, about the constant feeling of being in someone else's shadow. But most importantly, she spoke about the moment when everything changed, the moment she chose herself. Her eyes glistened with the weight of the journey, but there was no trace of sadness. There was only power, the power of having found herself, of having stopped waiting for permission to live her own life. "As women," Diana said, "we often put ourselves last. We're told to be selfless, to care for everyone else, but in doing so, we lose ourselves. I'm here to tell you that your story matters, your voice matters, and if you're ever in a situation where you feel small, where you feel invisible, remember that you are not defined by others' opinions of you. You define yourself." The room erupted into applause again, and Diana felt a wave of gratitude sweep over her. This was what she had worked for, what she had fought for. Her story was no longer just hers. It was for all the women who had been silenced, for all the people who had felt overlooked, for everyone who had ever been told they didn't matter. After the event, as the crowd slowly began to disperse, Diana stood quietly by the exit, still absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. She was finally a speaker, a motivator, someone who had inspired others to change their lives. It was surreal, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Megan joined her, a proud smile on her face. "You were incredible, Diana. You've become a symbol of everything people need to hear right now." Diana's heart swelled. "I never imagined this for myself. I spent so long thinking I wasn't enough. But I am, and I'm not going to hide that anymore." Exactly, Megan said, her voice full of admiration. You're not just telling your story anymore. You're giving people permission to take control of their own lives. As they walked out of the venue together, Diana's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Emily. She hadn't heard from her daughter in weeks, but this message was different. It was an apology, an attempt at re-entering her life, at rekindling a connection that had long since frayed. Mom, the message read, I'm really sorry about everything. I know I hurt you. I've been trying to change. Can we talk? I miss you. Diana's finger hovered over the screen for a long moment, her mind processing the words. Emily's apology, though heartfelt, was too little, too late. Diana had moved on. She had long since stopped waiting for Emily's approval or validation. She had found something far more important, the ability to stand on her own, to build a life based on her own needs, not someone else's expectations. With a soft exhale, Diana set the phone down and turned her attention to the future. There was nothing to go back to, nothing that needed fixing. She had already walked away from the past, embracing her newfound power and peace. Later that night, as Diana sat in her favorite chair with her journal, the weight of everything she had accomplished settled around her like a warm blanket. She wrote with ease, the words flowing naturally, as if her entire life had led to this moment, the moment when she finally took control. I've spent years living for someone else, but today, I live for me, she wrote. Today, I stand on my own. I am no longer defined by what others want from me. I define myself. Diana closed the journal with a deep sigh, content in a way she had never been before. She had come so far, and yet, she knew her journey had only just begun. The future was wide open, and she was ready for whatever it had to offer. The phone buzzed again, but this time, Diana didn't feel the need to check. She knew that no matter what came next, she had already found what she was looking for: peace, strength, and the freedom to live her truth. As she looked out the window at the fading light of the day, Diana knew one thing for sure: she had reclaimed her life. And no one, not even Emily, could take that away from her. She scheduled her party on my surgery day. I turned it into my victory, and that's the story she'll never tell.